to as just like a general introduction.
Sure. Hi, I'm Megan Skwirz. I'm in Portland, Oregon, and I am a senior consultant at Slalom Consulting, which is a management consulting firm. I mostly focus in mostly working with businesses in and around Portland who are tackling just some big, tough problems with their teams, whether it be team dynamics or implementing new technology or new systems of working. And I'm often part of teams who are helping them get through a big transition like that. Class of 2012, environmental studies and political science major, saw quite a few environmental studies majors on here, which I think when I graduated, there were about 8 in our class, maybe less, because it was sort of a newly formed major. So great to see so many people with that right now. And I was on track and field all 4 years. So jealous of the new complex that y'all get to see.
Yes, Hart and Lewis is very nice. Cole, could you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Cole Worthy. I'm in the Boston area. I work for Haley and Aldrich, which is a geotechnical environmental engineering firm. Coming up on 30 years at the same firm. So I'm pretty old, class of 88. I was a chemistry major at Holy Cross. I wish there was an environmental studies program back in the day, but started off working in a laboratory and then got my master's in civil environmental engineering from Tufts University. And a lot of my work is primarily with in the real estate group, work with developers and institutional clients, schools and hospitals as part of their master plan, and building construction, big skyscrapers, and deal with a lot of all the underground stuff, both contaminated soil and just supportive excavation to be able to support the loads of some of the massive buildings you see in the downtown Boston area.
Awesome. Thanks, Cole. And Jereme.
Hey everyone, sorry again for being late, just running from one meeting to the next, and I guess I don't know how to do Zoom. So Jereme Murray, I graduated in 2015. I was a physics major. I don't know if anybody else is a physics major on the call, but I feel your pain. I was confused for 4 years, but I made it out, so there's light at the end of the tunnel. Immediately after graduating from Holy Cross, did a master's at Notre Dame in tech entrepreneurship, and then started out my professional career at Deloitte. So I was doing the whole traveling consulting gig in our information security practice. Did that for a few years and then transitioned over to TransUnion, where internally I'm still a consultant working on some of our larger projects that we have going on within our operations group. While I was at Holy Cross, I played football for 4 years. So between physics and football, I had no social life. Not that I would have had one anyways. Happy to talk about consulting, have any questions you might have, and we can probably jump into it.
Awesome, thank you. So we're going to spend the next 20-ish minutes doing a Q&A here, and then we'll let the students ask questions for about 15 minutes, and then we'll break out into small groups so you can have a little more small group on alumni time. So the first question, and the alums can just jump in as they have answers, is why consulting? Why did you choose to go into this field, whether it's the specific position you're in or perhaps when you started?
Well, I guess for me, I guess I'll go first. I didn't really know what consulting was when I graduated. I was thinking I was going to, work in a laboratory and be a research scientist. My first job interview was with Polaroid, and like I said, I worked in a laboratory for a few years, and it just wasn't the fit for me. I wasn't able to interact with people as much. Stuck in the lab in a couple of rooms. So, which when I got my master's, there were a lot of similar people that were working for firms. I didn't have a chance to do an internship for consulting engineering firms, and I got my first job, and I really liked it. And it was a little bit of a transition just trying to keep track of my time, 15-minute increments. I feel like an attorney for, billing hours on 15-minute increments. But, the clients I work with and the projects, they're very exciting. And, it's exciting to work and come to work every day and work with, our clients have a lot of expectations and demands. And it's fun, but challenging at the same time.
I think similarly, I didn't know what consulting was, especially business consulting coming out of college. But I started my career in a startup and was wearing many hats. So I was calling customers and I was doing analysis and I was setting up systems and working with IT. And I think having sort of that broad experience, somebody who used to be a consultant sort of asked me, hey, have you thought about being a consultant before? Because it seems like you're pretty flexible. And the type of consulting that I'm in right now is general management consulting, so that I'm working with different clients around the city I live in. So Slalom doesn't have traveling consultants as much as bigger firms like Deloitte or Accenture. So I'm working with companies that are in my city and doing all kinds of different things with them. And I think that variety is really what attracted me to consulting and what's kept me here. So the idea that I don't really know what I'm doing, or I don't know what I'm getting into on a month by month basis, things change really quickly. And I think that variety is really what's kept me. And then being able to connect with a lot of different people who also work and live in Portland or around the city, and being able to find connections across all different companies.
Yeah, Megan, it's interesting that you started out in the the startup space, then moved over to consulting. I feel like you see more people starting out consulting and then branching out from there. So interesting. The way that consulting was pitched to me was essentially if you don't know what you want to do, it's a great starting point, which is exactly where I was when I was graduating. It gives you that, as Megan talked about, gives you that exposure to different aspects, right? So when you're talking about working with clients, you obviously have to have your potentially your sales hat on if you're trying to sell new work, your customer support hat on if you're dealing with their issues, in addition to the actual work that you're delivering, whether it be an implementation or a strategy engagement, things like that. So for me, it was, I had some idea of what consulting was, but I just didn't know what I wanted to do moving forward. And that was a great starting point.
Awesome. So if you think back to when you were a college student, how do you think Holy Cross prepared you for consulting as a field? Not necessarily your specific position, although you can certainly reference that, but just kind of broadly speaking.
I think the sort of how challenging, I was a political science and environmental studies major, and professors at Holy Cross, there's not a lot of straightforward, we're teaching you A through D, and now you have an exam on A through D. The exam often looks like a combination of a bunch of things, and you have to make connections and think more critically about what you learned. And being in classes like that, where I was sort of forced into sort of uncomfortable positions where I was like, oh shoot, I didn't study that exactly, but I think that I can make connections and get to the answer that I need to. That ambiguity, I think, had really prepared me. That and being in small classes, and being a sophomore in a class of mostly juniors or seniors or whatever it was, and gaining that confidence to speak in front of other people, because a lot of my position is facilitating conversations with people. So just getting used to voicing my opinions, making opinions quickly, and forming strategies pretty quickly and on the fly were all things that I had to do when I was in certain classes at Holy Cross. So definitely prepared me for ambiguity and confidence in speaking and facilitating.
Yeah, I guess I would echo what Megan was saying with the small clusters, and having to, as a chemistry major working in the labs, you had to collaborate with lab partners to come to a solution on, whatever experiment or different things were being thrown at you, forcing to adapt and learn on the fly. And just being able to be exposed to many different subject matters, not just, the sciences, but the English, the psychology, the history. Whereas, I found some of them maybe not as exciting as the math and sciences, which I tended to gravitate to. I think really helped me in my career at H&A, being able to have those public speaking skills, to be able to write pretty concisely, and to tell a story when you're dealing with a client, and to really sell your services. Because you're, as an engineer and a scientist, you're offering technical expertise on different subject matters, and you have to be confident in what you're presenting, not only accurate, but just to be confident and as well. And it's really brought me a long way with other consulting skills that outside of engineering, just engaging stakeholders, holding community meetings, some of those skills that, aren't just from a textbook, I think was really helpful at Holy Cross.
Yep. Not to be cliche, I echo both Megan and Cole. So the one thing that I think was a big plus coming from Holy Cross into consulting was the ability to teach yourself, especially with the things that you had no prior expertise in, to be able to do it quickly and then scale up your skill set to match the need of the project. And really, more importantly, to just ask questions and ask good questions and ask them often. I think that liberal arts education sets you up to be able to do that. And it's incredible how folks from other backgrounds do not ask simple questions like why or how or what, that often save you a lot of pain on the back end on some of these engagements. So just the ability to ask questions and constantly be curious is something that I think Holy Cross offered me.
That's great. And going along with this question idea, a lot of these engagements are on the shorter side. Pothos is on the shorter side. How do you build a relationship with your client quickly?
I guess for me, I don't think it's really quickly is the right term, because it does take time. It does take a lot of trust to be that trusted advisor, to be able to have the client come to you on a consistent basis for sole source work. It's a very competitive field that I'm in. Our firm's been in business for over 60 years, and engineering's engineering. And different firms can do the same thing. It's really how you present it, and it's all about relationships. And it doesn't come over a few years. It takes a lot of time to really develop that trust and gain the confidence with that client, and and not be afraid to make a mistake and say when you were wrong, and not try to sugarcoat different things, and give them the right story, the right price. And we're not the most cheapest firm. We're on the high end, but we deal with the more challenging projects and more complex projects, which why the clients keep coming to us. So I think it's persistence and just continuing that relationship over the years.
Yeah, I echo that. It's not a quick endeavor. To gain a relationship with a client, especially across the entire sales cycle, probably starts with some connection, whether it's networking, whether it's webinars or in-person meetings, right? So and then to foster that to setting up an actual engagement, executing on the engagement, and then continuing on follow-on work. It's definitely a long cycle, often through competition with other firms competing for the same business. But I think once you get a foot in the door with a particular client, it's about one, being able to set expectations on what you can achieve. You want to set some goals that you think are feasible for sure, but also making sure that it meets the timeline of the customer or the client. And then in addition, more specific to kind of key stakeholders, you kind of want to get a sense of their personality. So there's a bunch of different tests you can run to kind of figure out who your stakeholder is. Are they more of an exploratory personality? Are they very detail oriented? Are they more pie in the sky strategy? And then you can kind of tailor the deliverables and how you communicate with the client based on what they expect to see and their kind of personality involved.
Yeah, and I think with things that do have a quick turnaround, it's kind of all of the kind of like classic first impression things of showing up on time, like being really clear about why you're there, and like what the purpose of the, like what the expectations are, I think, to what Jereme mentioned. And I think having a focus on the person or the client. So listening to what they're, and again, like asking those questions and getting curious, like, where are your pain points? What are the problems that you're trying to solve? And instead of like coming in with the answer, really getting curious about like what they need, and focusing more on them than on yourself. And then like just following through and being consistent in the duration that you're going to be working with them. Yeah, I think that's it especially for short term. It's every interaction matters a lot when you only have a handful of interactions. So how do you get the most out of it and really like get that trust going and get them talking and really focus on them and their problems and their needs.
When you get a new assignment, could you describe some of the first things that you do? Perhaps it's researching the client, maybe it's bolstering your skills in a certain area, but someone hands you that assignment. What are those first steps?
I think if it's maybe a new industry or a new client that you're dealing with, just to start with some background information, getting yourself acquainted with the company, maybe the particular stakeholders, if you know their names involved that you're going to be working with, the industry that you're playing in, just because it'll set some context so that when you start some of those kickoff meetings, if they start throwing around terminology that you hadn't known previously, right, but you did your research beforehand, it'll just help facilitate some of those discussions, instill a little bit more confidence with the client. And then also, usually as a part of your engagement, you'll set out some sort of scope of work or objectives involved, just making sure that you're comfortable with what those objectives are, that they're clear with the client, and ultimately kind of strategizing at a high level how you're going to deliver or execute on that. So it's just a lot of prep work in the front end.
Yeah, we often, I would probably talk to anybody else who's worked with that client, since again, I'm in sort of the Portland metro area. A lot of the work that we do, we either are doing work with that client already, or we did 5 years ago. So trying to track down like what those relationships are and what those what the client has been like in the past. And then, yeah, taking a look at like what is the assignment from end to end, and do I understand it all, and how can I communicate it to the client clearly? Are they on the same page? Sometimes with consulting, somebody else is selling the work, and then or maybe you're part of that sales cycle, and then you get it there on the first day, and really nobody knows what the work is, because maybe there's been a gap, or the person you're working with isn't actually the one who bought the work. Like there can be a little bit of a disconnect there. So just starting from square one and really making sure you and the person you're working with at the client site like understands that scope of work, and what the first step is.
So for myself, our company is about 800 employees or so. And one of the first things that I tend to do is just review our comprehensive database to see if we've done work in the area or if we've done work with that client before. And then also, I want to do a check of a conflict of interest to see if an existing client is in conflict with this new client, to see if it's a go or no go. And we have a pretty formal process of whether we proceed with the work. And we tend to, sometimes turn down the one shop clients just for like one business deal and be done, just because we are extremely busy right now with a lot of key and target clients. So, and they're providing a lot of revenue. So there's a lot of factors that go in before we even will accept that work. But once we vet that out and it's a go to proceed with it, then I just, check to see if we have subsurface information for that particular client, because we're all about the underground engineering, to see if there's already available data that we can support rather than trying to reinvent the wheel. And then, if it's a new client, we might do like a financial background. I'll engage our legal team and our accounting department to see if they have a good payment history. It's all about getting paid. And if they have some complaints on their payment history, we may decline the work respectfully. But that's sort of how the engineering field for me works.
I've heard a lot about expectations and trust and laying the groundwork. There's probably a lot of folks here who couldn't necessarily define what a consultant does or like what your job is. So if you were talking to someone, perhaps it is the person that was assigned the service, what would you say that you're actively there to do? So if you could describe what your role is, how would you describe it?
Depends on the what the role is. I think I personally I kind of fill a lot of different roles depending on what the client is. But I think I'll usually try to root it in like, hey, this big change that was announced to the organization around like this new technology that's going to be implemented. We know that like your team hasn't used that technology before, and this person hired us to like help you get from where you are to where you need to be, so everybody's up and running and using that technology, or using that process, or meeting as a team in the right way, or whatever it might be. So I usually try to think of like what would be the context that that person does know, and then root it in like, I'm here to help you, and really just like bring you along however you need to be, to be successful. So because there is sometimes, and I don't know if Jereme or Cole, you've seen this, of sometimes people are a little skeptical of consultants, like, you don't know my business, or you don't know the problems that we have, or why did you get hired, like not explicitly saying that, or we don't really trust that you're going to do the right thing. So I really try to root it in like, we know this problem exists and we're here to do whatever it takes to help you. So kind of that service mindset whenever possible.
Yeah, no, definitely. That definitely pops up from time to time when you have folks internally that might not trust you, maybe just because from a risk management perspective, they have certain processes in place to restrict what contractors can do, especially with critical systems. But other times, yeah, it might be just a matter of not being as familiar with the contractors that are brought in, and sometimes it depends on the length of the engagement. I am blanking on your original question. Cathy, do you mind repeating it? I thought that was a good point. I forgot the original question.
Yeah, basically just like, what is consulting? How do you describe your role as a consultant to someone who has no idea what you're talking about?
Right. Yeah. So I go back to the statement of work. So obviously the client knows their problems, and there's a few reasons typically when they'll bring in a consultancy to help support. Either one, it's a short-term project or a finite amount of time, and they don't want to hire full-time employees to complete the job. And then number two, they're oftentimes you might have a skill set that, again, you don't want to hire full-time, but is very niche, and particular consulting firm will offer that as a competitive advantage so that you can get something done quicker. And then the third, I would say, is sometimes consultants are brought in to kind of break ties between certain groups internally, to provide strategic direction based on what they might have seen from their competitors or from other industries or companies, which you wouldn't be able to get otherwise internally. So it entirely depends on the scope of work, but more often than not, the client has an understanding of their own needs and their own objectives, and you're kind of there to make sure that happens, essentially.
So I'd say like the big picture is to help them solve some problems that they may have, and how do we get to that endpoint and that desirable result, whether it's a new building or a new like campus or something, master plan. So we, I think they bring us in along with other consultants such as architects, structural engineers, like mechanical folks, to help with that building envelope design, because they know they can't do it on their own. And being a consultant, you need to be familiar with the various building codes. You need to be familiar with the regulations, whether they're, for me, it's in the environmental regulations to keep them in compliance and out of trouble. And I'm also part of other professional associations to stay current and the trends of what's happening, so that we don't do something illegally or out of compliance and out of code and get them in hot water. So I think, and we help facilitate the project by bringing those teams together. Some of what Megan does with the management consulting. We also have a management consulting group just to help collaborate, because when you have all these different teams and synergies going on, you need someone to kind of hone in all of those teams, and we often facilitate those discussions and come up with the meeting agendas and the kickoff meetings and plan the work, and then check in with the work to see how it's going, and then report back. So it's a little bit more than just doing the task at hand. There's a lot that goes behind the scenes to get the work done.
Are there any student questions? You can either just put it in the chat or just unmute and ask.
I wanted to know, what type of work did you do when you started out at your company?
I can go first, I guess. So when I came in, I was primarily doing field work, doing groundwater sampling, doing soil sampling, going out, monitoring a drill rig, collecting soil samples for both geotechnical and environmental purposes. And I found it to be very valuable as I advanced my career to have an understanding of what that field work involved. I didn't have a whole lot of client interaction at that point. It was more, getting the data, and then being the chemist, I would interpret the data. And then once I moved from the field work, I started doing some report writing, which I kind of like doing that. And then that kind of gave me the opportunity to keep advancing my career, working with clients and being promoted to kind of where I am now. So doing the field work initially was a big part of my job. Which at times I like to do it now and avoid all the complicated stuff. But I'm too expensive to be on the field now, so.
I started out, so like I said before, I started out at Deloitte doing information security. I think consulting. My first engagement was actually internal, which is, at least at Deloitte, I think was a common practice. It kind of gave new consultants the ability to work on a project, follow the same sort of processes, project management, actual delivery and implementation, but is a little bit less risky because you're not necessarily going out to an external client. And I think I was doing third-party risk management program development, so people, process, and technology. Wasn't the most exciting first engagement, but was certainly a good starting point for me.
Yeah, and because I had about 5 or 6 years of professional experience before becoming a consultant, maybe a little bit more, my first engagement was something that was like squarely in my wheelhouse based on what they had interviewed me for. So it was like technology, project management, and product management. And that's evolved over the last 3 years since I've been at Slalom. So now that they sort of could see that I could do the thing that I said I was going to do, my engagements now can be more exploratory. So maybe it's not like I'm not an expert or super well-versed in something, but I want to explore there, and they trust that I can like stretch my skills and explore and still be able to deliver. So yeah, a little bit different since I think it wasn't my first job out of college. So, and now, they sort of put you on increasingly more complex engagements or leading engagements. So yeah.
Who else has questions? How about
Remember-
what's something that's not so great about consulting? Perhaps something, maybe it's the paperwork that you have to do, or maybe you don't get to know your clients that well because you have to move on pretty quick. Maybe it's the traveling.
For me, at Deloitte, the reason why I left actually was because of the constant travel. So at one point I was doing the standard Monday through Thursday. I think I spent more time, I was living in Chicago and spent more time in New York City for, 6 months to a year. And then I think when some of the international travel started to, I didn't know what time zone it was, or, if the sun was out or not. So, it just didn't align with, my kind of personal mindset, the ability to kind of like, make my own food and go to the gym and have some friends outside of work. So the fact that I was constantly on the move wasn't something I was interested in. But I think that looking back on it, though, I mean, it's still a great experience to be able to travel around a little bit. And, if you're in that position, that consulting position, and you do like to travel, that might be a benefit for you, but it just wasn't for me.
I think the hardest part for me is what I was mentioning of sometimes entering a space and you're working with a team who at first doesn't want you there, or maybe they have the skills, but the person who bought the work doesn't know that. So it's not, it just, that initial like, I wanting to add value right away and like wanting to like get my hand, like roll up my sleeves right away, sometimes gets delayed by that sort of like questioning of like, wait, what's the scope again? How do we get started? And they're often in organizations, like you can walk in and see when there are issues between leadership and people who aren't in leadership positions. All of that kind of gets exposed when you're a consultant and you're trying to work with both groups. So it can be challenging to like keep up with what's happening in the internal politics of the company. So it's not just a matter of like getting in and doing the work and leaving. Like you gotta figure out and work with them where they're at right now, which isn't always bright and shiny in the company you're in.
I guess for me, it's like I mentioned before, I love my job, and it's very, rewarding to be able to do what I do. But I think some of the challenges that as a consultant that I'm having is just the workload and demand with the multiple projects that are all happening at once. It's not, one particular client for one scope. There's like 25 different projects that I'm working on, and trying to get together the right team on your project that have the right resources and skill sets to be able to deliver at that time. And you might have someone available for that proposal phase, and then once we win the work, that person gets pulled off in another project. Then you have to try to find another person to fill in that need. And then does that person have the same skill set? So it's just the dynamics of being a consultant, and we're extremely busy right now. But I think that's probably the most demanding thing right now is, and then the client demands. Everyone wants things on a very quick, accelerated turnaround time, and you don't want to over promise. You want to be able to deliver on time, and time is of the essence all the time. And if you miss those critical deadlines, that client may not hire you for the next time. So trying to prioritize your work on a daily basis is very challenging. When you wake up in the morning, do I start checking my emails, or do I just need sometimes just to block off time just to be able to do the work. So things can get in the way very quickly.
So Cole, you're saying that this is a very busy time for you. Is 25 projects at once typical, or is that typical for Megan and Jereme as well? What is your workload typically?
For me or for them? Or
I guess all of you. 25 sounds like a lot of projects to happen at once.
well, they're not all like the same magnitude, but they are, and I've sort of, I used to, I started off as the, a field personnel, then I went into the project management sort of hat, and then now I'm more on the client leader, business development type of work that I do. So the good thing is I don't have to manage these projects, but there are some that I still manage and have to keep track of the budget, have to, do the invoicing, so there's many hats that, a consultant might have to wear, that, you have to be skilled in many different, have business acumen, you have to have, people skills, you have to be technically solid and be able to work, collaboratively together. So there's a lot that goes into it to be a good consultant.
And I'm typically, it now feels like a luxury to only be on one client, which is when I started, I was like, okay, 40 hours, you're like sitting with the client in their office for 40 hours a week. And now I think, especially because we're all virtual, I'm still virtual 100% of the time. There's no drive time between clients. So now I'll have about 3, which puts me more at like the 45 to 50 hours a week. And then there could be other ones that are like coming in the pipeline of like, well, I'm also talking to 1 or 2 other folks that might eventually buy from us. So ideally like 2, but I think, yeah, it is really a busy time right now.
Yeah, I'm only working on 1 project, but sometimes it feels like 25, depending on the day and who's knocking at my virtual door. I think that, so right now I'm working internally as an internal consultant within our operations group. So the concept of like working on proposals for new business or trying to service multiple customers at once isn't really applicable, which is good. But that doesn't stop kind of the smaller challenges that pop up as a part of the project from coming from different directions and trying to manage my time there. Fortunately, for me, the light at the end of the tunnel with this larger project that we have right now, and I move on to the next one and have some autonomy there internally around what they want to do. But it is very busy. I think that the pandemic has spurred a lot of, at least at TransUnion, a lot of internal operational efficiency initiatives, which has then kicked off a bunch of work happening at the same point in time. So I think that's why everybody feels so stressed out right now. We're trying to condense all this work into the kind of the fiscal year, but hopefully as things start to smooth out and get back to normal, it probably won't be as strenuous. So.
Hi.
I saw the chat, I don't know, the responsibilities or tasks you didn't expect to have. There's probably a lot. One of them that I joke a lot about is I'm in PowerPoint a lot. Nobody told me when I was going to be a consultant that like, if you figure out anything related to data or anything related to people, like if you can't visualize it and tell a story to multiple people, at least in my work, like it doesn't matter. Like you could have cracked the code for the most like complex problem, but if you can't simply display it on a slide for an executive who has 50 other things going on that day, then it's not going to move forward. So that's been a learning for me, is like just being in some sort of visualization application.
I think for me, it was, it's been the collaboration piece, the facilitation with, multiple stakeholders, whether it's, the various state agencies, the public agencies, the regulatory agencies, the client teams, and all the various like contractor teams, preparing like, specifications and reviewing specifications that kind of goes, above and beyond what, I was studying and what I thought I might be doing, which has been great, with the liberal arts degree kind of help mold me for that, to be able to handle that with the challenges and that I had at Holy Cross, being able to work through them. But
I would I would say the piece of a project that I didn't expect to have so much of a hand in, especially early on, was project management. Not necessarily the client management as a kind of junior consultant, but more of the understanding what resources you have available, how much time you have, setting up a project plan and Microsoft project or whatever PMO tool the client has, setting up weekly or bi-weekly status reviews and collecting the latest status from different components of the project. I think all of that, I just had assumed that would have been captured by a specific or dedicated project management person, whether on the client side or as a part of the consultancy. But you kind of jump into that immediately, especially at least at Deloitte as a junior consultant. So I think that piece was good because it gives you some understanding of how some of these larger projects fit together and can go awry if you're not kept abreast on the status of components of the project. But just something I wasn't expecting.
I know that there's a few more questions out there, but we're going to jump into breakout rooms. So hold those and you can speak to your specific alum when we get there. Just give us a few seconds here to do that. And then I believe we'll come back together at the end just for a quick little thank you. But as a reminder, in these groups, you can certainly continue these conversations, but it's also a good time to introduce yourself, who your client is, kind of what your specific engagement is as a small group, so that you can start thinking through what those first steps will be. Because I know a lot of you are starting to reach out to our business partners this week. Hello, everyone. You're all, it looks like everyone's back. Can we get a thumb of how that went? Feel like that was good? Yes, lots of 2 thumbs. I saw 2 thumbs. Fantastic. So thank you for coming tonight. Hopefully you learned a little bit about consulting, a little bit more about your mentor, your small group. Next steps are going to be having those business partner meetings, looking out for an email on Monday about week 3. And then remember, our mentors are very friendly and they're very willing to talk to you both about your projects and about consulting as a whole. So don't be afraid to reach out or connect with them on LinkedIn. If anyone has any questions, now is the time. Just in general. All right, then I think we're all set for tonight.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Megan,
everyone.
Jeremy,
Thank
and
you.
Cole.
right.
Thank you.
Best of luck, you guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
We'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Everyone. Good luck.
Thank you.